Good day, gentlemen. Welcome back to the channel. Today is April 25th, 2026, and this is your combat map review. There are serious developments to cover today, and if the Russian army manages to press its offensive momentum, the Ukrainian armed forces are looking at trouble not only in Sumi and Kharkiv regions, but on the Sloviansk axis and the Zaporizhzhia axis as well. Significant shifts are underway in favor of the Russian army, and that is exactly what we are going to break down together today. Before we get into it, if you are a new viewer, subscribe right now and hit the bell. YouTube's algorithms are actively working against content like ours, and notifications are the only reliable way to make sure you don't miss new episodes. To our regulars, a genuine thank you for staying with us, and a special word of gratitude to our sponsors and everyone supporting this channel financially. YouTube is cracking down hard on this kind of content: geopolitics, military analysis, frontline coverage. Our monetization gets restricted, our reach gets suppressed, and we sometimes receive warnings for no visible reason whatsoever. In these conditions, your direct support is not just a gesture, it is literally what keeps this project alive. Thank you to every single person who has found a way to contribute. Now, let's get to the map. Zaporizhzhia. Axis, the foliage factor. The tree cover has arrived, and with it, some very interesting Russian advances have begun. Let's take the eastern grouping sector as our first example. Yesterday I showed you objective control footage of Russian fighters operating on the outskirts of Novoselivka. That represents a penetration of more than 4 kilometers. I'd use the word penetration rather than advance, because questions remain about consolidation. Ukrainian footage showed strikes being conducted against Russian fighters in that area, so whether they managed to hold on remains an open question. Nevertheless, the fact that Russian forces are reaching that depth even on difficult sections of the line, bypassing the Huliapol fortified zone rather than pushing through it, exploiting precisely the tree cover, is a very significant signal, interesting for us as analysts. Alarming for the Ukrainian armed forces. If the Russian army continues to press here without letting up, if Russian infantry keeps filtering through toward Novoselivka, from there it is 6 kilometers to Omelnik. And Omelnik is what covers Orikhiv from the north. If Omelnik falls, Orikhiv is effectively condemned. Zaporizhzhia axis, strike on command post. There is also reporting from the Orikhiv direction worth highlighting separately. Reconnaissance elements of the 58th Army located what the Ukrainian armed forces had been carefully concealing: the command post of the unit holding the defense in Preobrazhivka. The coordinates were passed to strike drone operators of the 70th Guards Motor Rifle Regiment. After that, it was simply a matter of execution. They worked by day, they worked by night, no days off, no coffee breaks. The result, no one walked away. The command post, along with its personnel, was completely neutralized. Dnipropetrovsk axis. A triangle of fortifications. Following the fall of Hryshine, the Ukrainian armed forces situation here deteriorated predictably. Forces of the center grouping have already reached the outskirts of not just Vasilivka, but even further, the outskirts of Myr. Vasilivka itself, even according to Ukrainian sources, is already in the gray zone. Ukrainian forces are no longer there. As for the push on Dnipropetrovsk from the south, there is nothing to report yet. This remains the most difficult section of the entire axis. It is a triangle of 7 villages that amounts to one continuous fortified position, with a powerful defensive line covering it from the south on top of that. And here is the sobering reality. Even if the Russian army takes Dnipropetrovsk, things will not get easier immediately. Right behind the city sits another powerful defensive line, and behind that, yet another protecting Belozersk. Only after Belozersk does the terrain begin to open up. An extraordinarily complex task for the center grouping. Kostiantynivka, active phase beginning. No specific positional updates from Kostiantynivka over the past 24 hours, but Ukrainian public channels are already sounding distressed, reporting that Russian attacks have intensified and that Russian infantry is actively entering and establishing footholds inside the urban area. The battle for Kostiantynivka is entering its active phase. Kramatorsk direction. The Canal crossing reports indicate that Russian fighters have reached the Siversky Donetsk-Donbass Canal in the area of Malinivka. Ukrainian cartographers are also reporting that a canal crossing was achieved. Though consolidation remains the question, I am not fully confident in it, because Malinivka sits adjacent to commanding high ground. Serpent Hill is right there. Holding positions under fire from elevated terrain is a deeply uncomfortable proposition. The overall picture here is sobering. Beyond the canal, there are 4 defensive lines to break through before you even reach Kramatorsk, and the terrain approaching the city from the east is about as unfavorable as it gets. While it is positive that this direction has shown movement, I see no major breakthroughs here in the near term. The southern grouping simply cannot split itself 4 ways simultaneously, toward Mykolaiivka, toward Sloviansk, toward Kramatorsk, and now also Kostiantynivka. 4 cities at once is an impossible ask. Sloviansk axis. First streets entered, no footage yet, but I have fully reliable information that Russian fighters have entered Partizanska Street in Oleksandrivka. The Ukrainian resource deep state has confirmed this as well, expanding the grey zone to include the first streets of the settlement. The endgame is still a long way off. The main battle for Oleksandrivka has not even properly begun, and Ukrainian forces will throw everything they have at holding it. But the odds that the Russian army wraps up Oleksandrivka by summer are quite decent. And from there, Mykolaiivka is just a stone's throw away. Kupiansk, command failures and personnel purges. For defensive failures on the Kupiansk sector, the commanders of the 14th Mechanized Brigade and the 10th Army Corps of the Ukrainian Armed Forces have been relieved of their posts. The official statement specifically cited problems with organizing supply to the left bank grouping, resulting in the loss of several positions. This is a direct response to recent Russian advances in the area, and it reflects a deepening crisis in Kyiv's position here, driven in part by Russian pressure further north near Vovchansk, which forced Ukrainian command to redeploy forces away from Kupiansk to plug holes elsewhere. Sumi region, Group North advances, and finally from Group North. Mapping resources are still stubbornly refusing to mark Russian advances in the Krasnopilia district of Sumi region, as if they simply do not exist. The reason for that I cannot explain, because I genuinely do not know. Most of what is happening we were already aware of. The forests before Novodmitrivka and Taratutin are under Russian control. But the information that Russian forces have not merely entered, but effectively taken Taratutin, that is genuinely significant. We are waiting for objective control footage to confirm it. The line of contact as currently displayed on our regular map is frankly incorrect. Even Ukrainian cartographers have marked it on their maps, in red, not grey, indicating firm control. So there is no reason to be cautious about acknowledging it. Overall, the foliage has arrived, and the front has come alive noticeably compared to 3 or 4 weeks ago. I am fully confident that by May, the Russian army will return to pre-spring rates of advance, 400 square kilometers per month and above. The illusion of unity, how Europe lost its convenient shield. One of the most revealing stories of recent weeks is what has been unfolding inside the European Union since Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orbán stepped down from the rotating presidency of the EU Council. On the surface, the departure of the bloc's most vocal Eurosceptic and leading critic of the pro-Ukraine course should have cleared the path for a consolidated European position. The logic seemed obvious: remove the blocker and everything moves forward smoothly. Reality turned out to be far more uncomfortable. The authoritative outlet Politico published a piece that effectively blows the myth of European unity on the Ukrainian question to pieces. The substance is simple and deeply inconvenient. For months, Orbán served as a convenient shield for a whole range of European leaders who publicly declared support for Ukraine, but behind closed doors had absolutely no desire to take on concrete commitments regarding Ukrainian EU membership. While Budapest was loudly shouting no, everyone else could quietly nod along, as if to say we'd love to help. But Orbán is in the way. That escape hatch no longer exists, and European officials are saying so openly, even if without naming names. One source in the corridors of Brussels stated plainly, Leaders who oppose accelerated Ukrainian accession can no longer hide behind the Hungarian veto. They are now forced to either voice their position publicly or make decisions they are clearly not ready for, politically, financially, or institutionally. A telling scene played out at the Cypriot resort of Ayia Napa, where European heads of state and government gathered for an informal dinner. The setting was Mediterranean, the menu featured lamb and ravioli. The atmosphere was almost holiday-like, seemingly the perfect environment to reach agreement on something important. Yet it was precisely there, around that table, that it became definitively clear, according to those present, that European leaders remain deeply divided on what to do with Ukraine going forward. A joint statement at the end of the evening was never signed. Not because anyone forgot, not because there wasn't time, but because agreeing on a text simply proved impossible. And this came after the EU had declared with great fanfare the approval of a €90 billion credit package for Ukraine and yet another round of sanctions against Russia. The triumph was proclaimed, the press conferences wrapped up, and then came the sobering reality. Because a loan and sanctions are one thing, a genuine path to membership is an entirely different matter, requiring political will that many European capitals quite simply do not possess. The conditions Brussels placed on Kyiv in exchange for that loan deserve particular attention. The list is formidable: effective democratic mechanisms, support for a multi-party parliamentary system, rule of law, strengthened anti-corruption institutions, respect for human rights, including minority rights. On paper, a standard European integration package. But in the context of an ongoing armed conflict, these requirements take on an entirely different dimension. What is being asked is for a country at war to simultaneously undertake deep institutional reform. Whether any of this is realistically achievable appears to concern European officials very little. But it does create a very convenient formal pretext for dragging the process out indefinitely. The conclusion from all of this is bleak for anyone who expected a united Europe to send clear signals. There is no consensus. There are declarations. There is protocol. There are group photographs with smiles. But behind that facade lies a tangle of contradictions, competing national interests, and a collective unwillingness to take on genuine responsibility. Part 2. Tusk sounds the alarm: Poland and the fear of Russian threat. Let's move to something that is currently generating intense discussion in Polish political circles and has stirred no small controversy across European capitals. Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk gave an interview that can only be described as alarmist. His words are not diplomatic hedging, not carefully crafted formulations designed to avoid offending partners. This is the statement of a man who is either genuinely convinced of imminent catastrophe or is using the image of threat as a political instrument, or most likely both at once. Tusk stated that Russia could attack NATO countries within a foreseeable short-term horizon. And he was specific. He was talking about months, not years. He added that Poland takes its obligations within the North Atlantic Alliance with the utmost seriousness and expects the same from all other parties to the treaty. So far, fairly standard rhetoric for a Polish politician with a deep historical sensitivity toward the eastern neighbor. But then Tusk said something that demands much closer attention. He publicly called into question whether the United States, under the current administration, would actually defend Europe in the event of a conflict. The Warsaw Premier stated outright that it is critically important for Europe to understand whether the US is prepared to honor its alliance commitments to the degree spelled out in the treaties. And he added a phrase that, in diplomatic language, lands as something close to scandalous candor. I want to believe that Article 5 is still in force, but sometimes I have doubts. Article 5 of the Washington Treaty is the cornerstone of NATO, the collective defense provision under which an attack on one member of the alliance is treated as an attack on all. This is not merely a legal formulation, it is the psychological foundation upon which the entire architecture of European security has rested for 8 decades, and the Polish Premier is publicly suggesting that this foundation may have cracked. These are very serious words, particularly given that Poland today is one of the primary drivers of the European defense agenda, a country spending well above 2% of GDP on its military and actively accelerating that spending. If even Warsaw, with all its defense enthusiasm, harbors doubts about the reliability of the American security umbrella, this is a symptom of a deep crisis of transatlantic trust. Moscow, naturally, was quick to respond. Russian official Dmitriev weighed in on Tusk's remarks in his characteristic manner, with a layer of sarcasm and an implied threat. According to him, within 2 months, Poland will apparently be begging Russia for energy supplies. He also advised the Polish Prime Minister to stock up on aviation fuel for flights to Moscow. The comment is clearly aimed at a domestic Russian audience and is designed to project confidence in the inevitability of a return to the old format of relations. How well-founded that confidence actually is remains a separate question. But the very existence of this kind of rhetoric tells you that any dialogue between Warsaw and Moscow today is conducted exclusively through public barbs.